Helen Mariani ha perso il marito nel volo United che si è schiantato nella Torre Sud. Ha denunciato il presidente Bush, il vice Cheney e le alte cariche dello Stato per alto tradimento.
I wish they all were here. Neil spent, my husband, 4 years in the Air Force. We had a memorial in front of my home. 3 of my daughters and 1 of my sons, my only son. You can see that flag will not be flown until justice for me and the rest of the 3,000 will be served in the courts in New York. These are the questions that I want to ask Mr. Bush. It is still my personal belief that you intentionally allowed September 11, 2001 to happen. You gathered public support for a war on terrorism. I find distasteful for you to use our disaster of death and destruction for your political gain. Our American dreams of freedom have been shattered for the future generations to come. Thank you.
Barry Zellman ha perso il fratello nel crollo della Torre Sud.
I just embrace people that understand that 4 airplanes, an hour and a half between the first impact and the second impact, with 0 military response in the United States, it didn't happen that way. It couldn't have happened that way. You're talking about the most intelligent agencies that we have in the face of Europe, state-of-the-art agencies, and there was 0 military response. And, you know, I'm a fair person. I listened to all sides of the argument, and I did research upon research, and no one could give me the answer. But it's very transparent because our own president did not want to investigate this tragedy. And I'm standing before you today for one reason. The only thing that I could give my brother is the truth. That's it. I didn't get paid a cent. You know, the money was out there to shut people up. It's a strange dynamic, money, because there's two sides to 9/11 families. There are ones that were paid and the ones that weren't. But the money was there for one reason: it's to keep people, pay them off, and keep them quiet. And I thank people like you that are listening. Thank you very much.
Kristen Breitmeyer, Lori Von Auken, Patti Casazza e Mindy Kleinberg sono conosciute come le vedove del New Jersey. Dal giorno degli attentati hanno unito le loro forze e combattono incessantemente perché la verità venga a galla.
I knew right away. I knew approximately where his office was because he said that he was looking directly across at Tower 1, and I just had a feeling inside. And then when I saw the buildings subsequently collapse, I just said, my God, he is gone. And I fell to the floor and...
What happened after those planes took off? And I think you feel this way too. Do you want to talk about that?
You know, I have a lot of problems with the Pentagon. I don't understand how a plane could hit our Defense Department, which is the Pentagon, an hour after the first plane hit the first tower. I don't understand how that is possible. I'm a reasonable person, but when you look at the fact that we spend $500 billion on national defense, and you're telling me that a plane is able to hit our Pentagon, our Defense Department, an hour after the first tower was hit, there are procedures and protocols in place in this nation that are to be followed when transponders are disconnected, and they were not followed on September 11th.
I thought democracy just worked. And I learned that it doesn't go like that. That if you want to live in this great country of ours with our fabulous democracy and our Constitution and, you know, our different rights, freedom of speech and all the things that we take for granted, you have to fight for those things.
I had faith in all of my leaders on September 10th that they are doing the best jobs that they could to protect the lives of my loved ones, my friends, my countrymen.
I didn't understand that I needed to look at the bigger picture. I've turned into a very disenchanted, fully awake, no longer naive person. I want to meet with the NSA, CIA, and the FBI together in one room.
I'm sitting there with a FBI agent who's very high up, not the director, but nonetheless very high up in the FBI. And I said to him, I don't understand. You have the Phoenix memo, you have Zacharias Moussaoui in custody. You had actually been to the flight school that you picked up Zacharias Moussaoui at 4 or 5 times before to investigate other individuals, one of those individuals who happened to be a pilot for Osama bin Laden himself. And you had the Phoenix memo alerting you to the interest that these Middle Eastern men had in flight schools. How is it that you didn't find them prior to 9/11? So this agent says to me, do you know how many flight schools there are in America? Thousands. Do you know how many ground instructors there are? Thousands. And you expected us to go to every single flight school to find these handful of men? And I'm like, well, honestly, yes. So then I'm like, okay, fine, I'll give you that. I'll give you that you couldn't have hit every flight school. I'm like, okay, fine. Well, how is it that if there's thousands of flight schools and you could never have found them, how is it that you went to Embry-Riddle Flight School in Daytona Beach, Florida, hours after the attacks? If there's thousands of flight schools, how did you just happen to go to that one exact perfect school that some of the hijackers went to? How'd you know to go to that school? And he just looked at me and goes, we got lucky.
The last routine communication between ground control and the plane occurred at 8:13 a.m. Between 8:13 and 8:20, Flight 11 became unresponsive to ground control. Additionally, radar indicated that the plane had deviated from its assigned path of flight. Soon thereafter, transponder contact was lost. 2 Flight 11 airline attendants had separately called American Airlines reporting a hijacking, the presence of weapons, and the inflictions of injuries on passengers and crew. At this point, it would seem abundantly clear that Flight 11 was an emergency. And yet, according to NORAD's official timeline, NORAD was not contacted until 20 minutes later at 8:40 a.m. Tragically, the fighter jets were not deployed until 8:52 a.m., a full 32 minutes after loss of contact with Flight 11. Why was there a delay in the FAA notifying NORAD? Why was there a delay in NORAD scrambling fighter jets? How is this possible when NEADS was fully staffed with planes at the ready monitoring our airspace? Flight 175, 77, and 93 all had the same repeat pattern of delays in notification and delays in scrambling fighter jets. Delays that are unimaginable considering a plane had, by this time, already hit the World Trade Center. Is it luck that aberrant stock trades were not monitored? Is it luck when 15 visas are awarded based on incomplete forms? Is it luck when emergency FAA and NORAD protocols are not followed? Is it luck when a national emergency is not reported to top government officials on a timely basis? To me, luck is something that happens once. When you have this repeated pattern of broken protocols, broken laws, broken communication, one cannot still call it luck.
Lives would have been saved. My husband was in Tower 2. If he knew that it was a terrorist attack, he wouldn't have stayed in the building.
When they were told that the building was secure and to stay at their desk, maybe they would have left. Maybe, those who thought that the first attack was an errant plane would have thought differently and responded differently. But again, we weren't given the information to make any of these decisions for ourselves.
Even as the first tower burned on every channel that morning, no one on the federal level who had received warnings all summer called New York to order an evacuation of Tower 2. No one ordered fighters to perform any timely defensive action against the remaining hijacked planes. No one responded adequately to the crisis.
It has been said that the intelligence agencies have to be right 100% of the time, and the terrorists only have to get lucky once. This explanation for the devastating attacks of September 11th, simple on its face, is wrong in its value. Because the 9/11 terrorists were not just lucky once. They were lucky over and over again. When you have this repeated pattern of broken protocols, broken laws, broken communication, one cannot still call it luck. If at some point we don't look to hold the individuals accountable for not doing their jobs properly, then how can we ever expect for terrorists to not get lucky again?
On September 11th, 2001, 2,972 people from more than 80 countries were killed, leaving thousands of loved ones behind. While grieving continued for many, some began to move beyond their personal pain.
My husband's service was in October, and then I think I went into angry mode. And that's when I started to question everything.
I spent a lot of time on the computer. I started reading every single article that I could get my hands on.
I mean, there was no sleeping at the beginning because we were grieving. It was hard to lay down. So I would spend all night just researching.
I want to meet with the NSA, CIA, and the FBI together in one room.
Out of the many who were researching on their own, 4 widowed mothers found each other. New Jersey residents Mindy Kleinberg, Patty Casazza, Lori Van Auken, along with Kristen Breitweiser, became known as the Jersey Girls.
We became friends and like-minded. We all had questions. We all had questions, and we wanted answers.
At the top of the family's growing list of questions, why had the U.S. military defenses failed to stop any of the 4 hijacked planes?
The FAA alerted U.S. air defense units of a possible hijacking at 8:38 Tuesday morning.
The last plane was reported to have crashed in Pennsylvania just after 10 a.m.
That's almost 2 hours, where planes were flying around the skies of the United States with no military response.
Coming across an article in a Canadian paper, the Jersey widows learned it had been a routine for NORAD, the military apparatus in charge of air defense, to scramble fighters to intercept planes during suspected emergencies.
Fatal accident involving a Learjet flying across
the women recalled one such incident that was heavily reported in 1999.
Just 25 minutes into the flight, controllers lost radio contact with the pilot, and an Air Force F-16 on a training mission was sent to take a look. Ultimately, 6 military jets gave chase. The plane was tracked by the FAA on radar. At high levels, the military, even the White House, discussed what to do.
Tell me what the difference was between those times and the day of September 11th.
They wondered about the lack of immediate response by the president and his Secret Service detail. President Bush was in a Florida elementary school classroom that morning, where he sat for more than 7 minutes after being informed of the second attack.
Thomas Kean and Lee Hamilton are named as chairman and vice chairman of the 9/11 Commission. By December 16, 2002, 10 initial members of the 9/11 Commission have been appointed. On the stage. And the man missing from this picture? Philip Zelikow, executive director. He would shape both the commission and its final report. The 9/11 Commission begins its investigation with a time frame of 18 months and a starting budget of $3 million. January 27, 2003. The 9/11 Commission holds its first hearing in Washington, D.C. Vice Chairman Lee Hamilton will claim a few days later, "We're not interested in trying to assess blame. We do not consider that part of the Commission's responsibility."
That's the official start of our first public hearing of what is going to be an extraordinarily difficult and important job.
In March of 2003, 441 days after the attacks, the official investigation began in New York.
Very much, Mindy Kleinberg from September 11th Advocates.
On the morning of September 11th, my 3-year-old son Sam and I walked Jacob 10 and Lauren 7 to the bus stop at about 8:40 a.m.
Brad was 24 years old and the oldest of our 3 sons.
Family Steering Committee members were among the first to testify before the commission.
Hey Mom, it's Brad. Just wanted to call and let you know, I'm sure that you heard, or maybe you haven't heard, that a plane crashed into World Trade Center 1. We're fine, we're on World Trade Center 2. I'm obviously alive and well over here, but obviously a pretty scary experience. I saw a guy fall out of probably the 91st story, all the way down. So, you're welcome to give a call here. I think we'll be here all day. I'm not sure if the firm's going to shut down for the day or what, but give me a call back later. I called Dad to let him know. Love you.
Welcome, Mayor Michael Bloomberg of the City of New York.
From the outset, many families were concerned by how the investigation was being conducted.
We begged and pleaded that people should be put under oath. At the beginning, they were not.
We'll describe our city government.
As the hearings progressed, the families were becoming more and more frustrated by what they perceived as softball questioning from the commissioners.
Have appreciated already his remarks.
We have certain questions that we, families, wrote for each of the people that were coming to testify today, and the questions weren't asked.
Complete waste of time. It was a bunch of people throwing accolades at each other and asking the same questions one after the other.
Skirting around issues, not being defined enough in their questions.
It's a stonewall, it's a cover-up. As far as I'm concerned, I'm very bitter, I'm very angry.
Still, no one was prepared for what they then uncovered about Philip Zelikow, the executive director of the 9/11 Commission.
He who had the power to say where the investigation was going, who would be interviewed, what would go into the 9/11 Commission report, what wouldn't.
We have found out that he not only served on the transition team of the Bush administration, that he was a person who wrote a draft memo for the setup of the Bush administration's National Security Council, that he was an individual who wrote the preemptive war strategy that was eventually used for the war in Iraq, that he is a close friend of Condoleezza Rice's. We want him to resign.
Philip Zelikow refused to resign, and Chairman Keene dismissed the family's concerns over conflicts of interest. Nearly a year in, the commission had only received a small amount of the documents that they had requested.
At this point, what we have is literally hundreds of boxes of materials that have come into the commission, and we have not sorted through that.
They gave them boxes and boxes of documents, but not left pertinent documents out.
A deal announced yesterday between the White House and the commission investigating the September 11th attacks is proving to be rather controversial. Under the agreement, only certain members of the commission will be allowed to review classified documents from the White House, and their notes will be subject to administration review.
I mean, I'm a member of the commission. The president has said only a minority of the commission can see a minority of the documents, and then they have to clear what they're going to say to the rest of the commission with the White House.
The only 2 commission members allowed direct access to the documents? Jamie Gorelick, the Deputy Attorney General under President Clinton, and Philip Zelikow.
I felt that the fix was in at that point in time.
The majority of the commission felt that it was better to see these documents rather than take a chance of not seeing them at all.
It's a scam. It's absolutely disgusting. This is important. We cannot do our responsibilities if we don't have all of us access to all the documents we need, including what's in the White House.
In testimony before the 9/11 Commission later this week, and in a new book to be published tomorrow, Against All Enemies, Clark will tell the story of what happened behind the scenes at the White House before, during, and after September 11th.
To the loved ones of the victims of 9/11, your government failed you. Those entrusted with protecting you failed you. And I failed you.
Mr. Clark is the first person that has apologized to the families.
Clark's testimony provided the families with the timely leverage they needed to increase public pressure on reluctant White House witnesses.
May 19th, 2004, Rudolph Giuliani testifies before the 9/11 Commission.
We will now hear from our first witness, the very distinguished former mayor of New York City, Rudy Giuliani. Mayor Giuliani, would you please rise and raise your right hand and place you under oath?
And the fact that so many of them interpreted it that way kept a much calmer situation and a much better evacuation. These people.
Please ask. We're simply wasting time at this point. It should be used for questions. Please.
Thomas Kane and Lee Hamilton will later claim in their book, Without Precedent, that they were too soft on Mayor Giuliani. One of the questions they failed to ask was who warned him that the South Tower was going to collapse.
Mr. Mayor, can you hear me?
I can, Peter.
Are you talking about did you go immediately to the Office of Emergency Management?
I went down to the scene and we set up headquarters at 75 Barclay Street, which was right there with the police commissioner, the fire commissioner, and we were operating out of there when we were told that the World Trade Center was going to collapse. And it did collapse before we could actually get out of the building.
Who didn't warn everyone in the building?
I admire that greatly, and I think that may
dead.
May very well be one of the reasons for your leadership and your cooperation in this commission.
Let's ask the real questions.
The 9/11 Commission would release its final report on July 22nd, 2004, and closed its doors on August 21st.
So the 9/11 Commission was a cover-up. The question is what it was covering up. The charitable explanation is gross negligence, malfeasance, misfeasance, and what you call it, okay?
If you can't read all 571 pages of the report, in August 2006, the 9/11 Report comic book was released. It should tell you all you need to know. On the morning of September 11th, 19 Arabs boarded 4 commercial airliners at 3 different airports and crashed them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, with 0 military intervention. Or, we have been and continue to be lied to about the events of September 11th, and that elements within the United States government and mainstream media continue to cover up the truth. These are the same people that lied about weapons of mass destruction. They endorsed a lie that's killed several 100,000 innocent people overseas. Could they also endorse a lie that killed almost 3,000 innocent people in our own country? Our entire foreign and domestic policy has been based upon the events of September 11th. It has enabled the passage of Patriot Act 1 and 2, established the Department of Homeland Security, facilitated the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq, and used to pass the Military Commissions Act, which officially ended habeas corpus.
Habeas corpus in Latin means you have the body. It's a provision in the law where no one can just scoop up someone, put them in a black hole, and keep them there without that person having the right to appeal to a court and say, you have the body, now what do you charge this person with, and what redress does he or she have?
As well as domestic surveillance, all in the name of fighting terrorism. And who ends up paying for all this? You do. Your children do. When President Bush entered office, he inherited a $284 billion surplus. His administration is now responsible for 4 out of the top 5 deficits in history. The 5th place belongs to his father. As of November 2nd, 2005, the Bush administration had borrowed more from foreign nations than all previous administrations combined. From 1776 to 2000, 42 presidents borrowed a total of $1.01 trillion from foreign governments and institutions. From 2001 to 2005, the Bush administration alone borrowed $1.05 trillion. Where does this money go? The government designed by the people, for the people, has turned its back on us. Or have we turned our backs on it? They spy on us. They torture and imprison innocent civilians. Ask yourself, what's happening? Where are we headed?
Not long after the disaster, Lower Manhattan saw banners like this one. Although they were idolized as cathedral-like symbols of power and triumph that pierced the New York skyline, the Twin Towers were big money losers for the Port Authority of New York. They cost millions a year to equip with the basics: electricity, water, heat, air conditioning, sewage, and even oxygen, being airtight. As modern communications connected traders from all corners of the globe, tenancy in the Twin Towers continued to drop. The towers presented another problem. Decades ago, their steel beams had been sprayed with fireproof asbestos, a cancer-causing material banned from use in building in the mid-1980s. Although the World Trade Center complex was given several waivers, it was expected to clean up its act. But to remove the asbestos from every supporting beam in the Twin Towers would have been almost undoable. Quotes for this cleanup ran over $1 billion, and no insurance company was willing to bear the cost. An urban renewal project of unfathomable proportions. Given the tower's issues and problems, September 11th proved an unexpected bonanza. The Trade Center was built in the 1960s to revive a rundown area of New York, and 40 years later, urban renewal could again take place. 2 white elephants were removed, and a brand new complex is in the works. The full height of the new Freedom Tower will soar to 1,776 feet. The suffocating dust that engulfed Manhattan was much more than dust. It was pulverized concrete, glass, metals containing lead, mercury, dioxins, benzene, and of course asbestos. None of that was healthy for any living thing. Today, thousands of rescue workers have developed lung cancer and serious permanent health conditions. And the rescue dogs continue to die.
What you had was a ground-level municipal incinerator that smoldered for months, burning up the most heavily computerized building in the world. Patients have had black paste coming out of their pores. They have reported bowel movements that are blue or green and have smelled like smoke, despite the fact that they have not been at a fire scene for months.
Only 3 days after September 11th, Washington instructed the EPA to declare Manhattan safe and reopen Wall Street, though the air remained toxic.
A federal judge is blasting the former head of the Environmental Protection Agency for telling New Yorkers it was safe to return to their homes and offices near Ground Zero soon after the 9/11 attacks. The judge called Christine Todd Whitman's actions, quote, conscience shocking, and refused to grant her immunity.
It was documented that the White House ordered EPA to tell these lies, to downplay the seriousness of the environmental hazards.
In addition, 9/11 first responders who have fallen ill and applied for aid have been denied.
Gary White was an American hero in 2001.
Did you actually get diagnosed as being directly sick from 9/11?
In 2010, the 9/11 first responder represents an exploding health crisis U.S. officials have failed to address.
It's totally across the page. Carcinoma, sarcoma, gallbladder cancer, liver cancer.
The retired NYPD detective spent 6 months sifting through World Trade Center debris and clouds of toxins, later resulting in asthma, sleep apnea, post-neurological problems, and 2 strokes.
The first one was massive. I was paralyzed. I lost command of my speech. I had to learn how to walk and talk again.
The police department denies his illnesses are linked to 9/11.
Yep, still fits.
Leaving the 23-year veteran with mounting medical debt.
This one wants $1,453.
And a daily dose of 15 medications.
Inflammation pills, pills to stop the cramping in my legs so I can walk, blood pressure medications.
The worst attack on U.S. soil took place here on September 11th, a day when nearly 3,000 people lost their lives in a matter of hours. And in the 9 years that have followed, 900 first responders have died, victims of their own courage. NYPD Sergeant Michael Ryan was diagnosed with 3 types of cancers before losing his battle at just 41 years old. Eileen Ryan is just one of many widows who lost a heroic husband post 9/11.
All these men and women that are fighting for their life right now, it's a progress. It's time. It's watching a loved one disintegrate in front of your face, and just the fight to stay alive.
And it's a fight that can break even the strongest. John Devlin was diagnosed with throat cancer. Hospital bills top $1 million.
We do so much overseas, and I'm not saying not to do it. We're a powerful nation. We should lead by example, but we're not leading by example here. We're not leading by example here when you turn your backs on the 9/11 emergency responders.
Those who sacrificed for the country now left struggling alone. Marina Portnaya, RT, New York.
And when we talk about media attention, it's very interesting to juxtapose how much of it is surrounding these pastors and the Quran burning and how little attention is given to this story. Marina, have you been able to figure out why that's the case?
You know, when I speak to a lot of these 9/11 first responders, what they say to me is that they feel the rest of the country essentially has forgotten about 9/11 and forgotten about the aftermath of 9/11 and what people may be suffering from. That's essentially the common thread of those people that I've spoken with. They feel like America has moved on aside from New York, and now it's considered a New York City problem. Now, as for mainstream media, I don't know why they would not report this story day in and day out, because it is such an important story. Dina, we have to remember that less than 2 weeks after the September 11th attacks, the EPA came out and said the air is safe to breathe. More than 70,000 first responders and rescue workers went down there and worked round the clock for more than 10 months under the guarantee that the government said the air is safe to breathe. And now you have people, men and women, falling victim to cancer and dying from cancer and leaving their families behind.
look, I mean, she's already dropped the atomic bomb on them. She's already released the numbers.
Yeah, I have, and not to be concerned, I have no intention of letting anyone buy me off or make any kind of a deal with me.
And you're not planning to commit suicide.
And I'm not planning to commit suicide either.
The fact that you're so visible really protects you going on Larry King and other big shows, but you want to put it on record that you're not planning to commit suicide?
No, I'm not planning to commit suicide. I'm planning to go into court on April 7th if indeed we do have the trial, and I plan on defending myself vigorously, and I plan on exposing the government in ways that, I do not think they want me to expose them.
Law enforcement about their investigation into the D.C. madam.
When she went outside, she noticed the three-wheel bicycle had been moved that was normally kept in the shed. Upon entering the shed located on the west side of the residence, Blanche Palfrey discovered her daughter, Deborah, had apparently hung herself using a nylon rope from a metal beam on the ceiling of the shed. She then called 911. At approximately 11:01 a.m., Tarpon Springs Fire Rescue had pronounced Deborah Jean Palfrey deceased.
This is a scandal of tremendous proportions. It makes Watergate look small. But there's a strange lack of interest of people both on the left and on the right. Nobody seems to want to uncover the truth and just follow leads wherever they may go, because I think that goes to a lot of really damaging places.
Maybe we shouldn't have questioned whether or not President Nixon had any involvement in Watergate. Maybe we should have just accepted that story. Maybe we should have accepted the story that President Clinton had no involvement, had never had sex with that woman, Miss Lewinsky. So just because it's the official story of record does not mean that we should not delve further and to see if really that is the actual story.
Yes, they lied. They all lied. Whether consciously or unconsciously, it happened. Now we need to look into why they lied and what were the results of those lies.
We can't have these wars, reorganize our way of life based on a false understanding of what 9/11 was. We have to go beyond the myth and get to the truth. We have to know. We have to.
9/11 was the biggest don't ask, don't tell. And if it wasn't for the families, we wouldn't have anything. And that's very frightening.
We had to take this tragedy and do the best we could with our lives and with our country to try and make the people that are supposed to protect us do the right thing.
What I really wanted to happen here is for my children to feel safe. I could have cared less who was in office. I wanted the truth, and I wanted what was wrong to be fixed.
What we're left with after our journey is no answers, no accountability, and I've wasted 4 years of my life trying my damnedest, along with the other family members, to make sure this never happens again.
Let me just say something real quickly about my son, please. On the wall in his room, it said, "Knowledge is power." I am only doing this for one reason and one reason only, to carry on his legacy. I'm so pissed off at the American people. I'm so pissed off at this government because of this cover-up.
John Gerard Coughlin, Timothy J. Coughlin,
Anne Marie Kramer,
Christopher Seaton Kramer,
and my big brother, Wade Brian Green. We miss you, we love you, and you are always in our hearts.
And what's it going to take until people in this country give a damn and do something about it? America has been hijacked. Not by Al-Qaeda, not by Osama bin Laden, but by a group of tyrants ready and willing to do whatever it takes to keep their stranglehold on this country. So what are we going to do about it? Anything. Share this information with friends, family, total strangers, hold screenings, conferences, whatever you have to do to get the word out. It's up to you. Ask questions. Demand answers.